Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into the captivating and honestly mind-blowing ways ancient Egyptians viewed death. You see, for them, it wasn't an end at all. It was actually a highly structured transitional phase into eternal life. They didn't just cross their fingers and hope for immortality. They literally engineered it. They built an architecture of eternity, using their environment, their physical science, and their profound emotional bonds to make absolutely sure they lived forever. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to quickly cover 1. The environment and the Osiris myth, 2. The sacred instructions they left behind, 3. The physical vessel, 4. The emotional anchor of family bonds, and finally, 5. Their modern legacy. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the environment. Specifically, the Nile and the famous Osiris myth.
Now, this mythological saga of Osiris wasn't just some fairy tale they told kids at bedtime. It was the literal blueprint for their funeral practices. Imagine the drama here. It kicks off with absolute betrayal, where the jealous god Set tricks his brother Osiris into a coffin and just tosses him into the Nile. Then comes the desperate recovery phase. Osiris's devoted wife, Isis, tracks this coffin all the way to a tree in Byblos. But Set isn't done. He finds the body, brutally hacks it apart, and scatters the pieces all across Egypt. Finally, through sheer, tireless devotion, Isis finds all the dismembered pieces and reassembles them. But because Osiris was incomplete, he couldn't return to the mortal world. Instead, he became the lord of the afterlife. This wild story firmly established the Nile not just as a river, but as a divine force intrinsically linked to life, death, and resurrection.
And you can actually see this belief physically built right into their architecture. Take the Djed column, for example. It is heavily featured throughout Egyptian ruins. It's a direct physical nod to that myth we just talked about, representing either the tree in Byblos that encased Osiris's coffin or his actual resurrected backbone. To the Egyptians, carving this symbol into a tomb or a temple was a way to literally build stability and the promise of eternal rebirth into the physical world around them. Moving right along to Section 2, the instructions. We're talking sacred texts and spells. It is so fascinating to watch how this sort of spiritual technology evolved over thousands of years. Look at the Old Kingdom, around 2686 BC. We start with the pyramid texts. These were incredibly exclusive, carved directly onto the walls of royal burial chambers just to help pharaohs ascend to the stars. But jump forward to the Middle Kingdom in 2025 BC, and something amazing happens with the coffin texts. These were painted on the coffins of everyday nobles and citizens. They were effectively democratizing eternity. By the time we hit the New Kingdom, around 1550 BC, we get the famous Book of the Dead. These were incredibly detailed spells written on highly accessible papyrus scrolls that you could just place right inside the tomb.
So the really crucial point to understand here is that for the ancient Egyptians, writing itself was considered a magical act. Hieroglyphics weren't just mundane records, they were divine voices. If you wrote a spell on a tomb wall or a scroll, it immediately became a sacred tool that actively sustained cosmic order and, essentially, mathematically guaranteed your immortality.
Which brings us to Section 3, the physical vessel. How exactly did they preserve the body and soul? To create that physical anchor we talked about, they engaged in the deeply sacred process of mummification. Just imagine the meticulous dedication this took. First, they carefully removed the internal organs. Then, they completely desiccated the body using a natural salt called natron. Next, they wrapped it incredibly tightly in linen cloth, purposefully layering in all these protective charms and amulets. And all the while, priests are reciting magical spells to trigger spiritual rebirth. Now, this level of extreme physical intervention wasn't just reserved for the pharaohs. Everyday people went through it too, because they firmly believed preserving the body was absolutely non-negotiable. The physical form had to survive so the soul could stay anchored to the material realm and keep receiving food, drink, and prayers.
And there's a deeply poetic concept at play here. Mummification actually mirrored the daily renewal of the sun. It really highlights their core belief that death was essentially just the ultimate reset button. Just as the sun sets and beautifully rises again the next morning, the mummification process was viewed as a way to wash away all the hurts, the diseases, and the inconveniences of mortal life, allowing that person to start completely afresh in the next world.
Next up, Section 4, the emotional anchor, the eternal family bond.
Honestly, what good is eternal life if you're completely alone? We see their profound humanity in practices like letters to the dead. Living family members would literally write out these desperate pleas and leave them at the tomb chapels of their departed loved ones. One heartbreaking plea from a man named Merit Atifi to his deceased wife goes like this: "Look, I am your beloved on earth, so fight for me. Intercede for my name." It is just so beautiful because it shows how they viewed the dead not as gone forever, but simply relocated. They actively relied on their deceased spouses and ancestors to cure illnesses and fix earthly problems from the other side.
And it went both ways. The dead were looking for the living just as fiercely. Coffin text spell 146 describes this desperate cosmic search. It says the deceased is going down to the sky, the earth, the water, seeking out his father, his mother, his children, his brothers and sisters. You see, their vision of heaven wasn't just sitting alone on a cloud. It was a grand reunion. They wanted their spouses, their parents, and even their earthly servants right there with them. For the ancient Egyptians, the ultimate victory over death was keeping the family unit entirely intact.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, the modern legacy, Egyptology and heritage.
It is totally wild to think about the sheer scale of the scientific invasion of Egypt. When Napoleon invaded back in 1798, he didn't just bring soldiers and cannons. He brought this massive, unprecedented array of professionals. We're talking 167 scholars in total. He brought astronomers, botanists, painters, and over 50 engineers. This huge gathering of minds to study the ruins left behind by the ancient Egyptians sparked the scientific dawn of Egyptology. Because the Egyptians left so much tangible physical material behind, they essentially forced the modern world to invent a brand new science just to study them.
And that massive gathering of minds yielded some unbelievable results. Fast forward to 1922, the British Egyptologist Howard Carter made the absolute discovery of a lifetime, the sealed tomb of the boy king Tutankhamun. Inside, he found over 2,000 pristine funerary items, including literal golden couches carved into the shapes of animals. Discoveries like Carter's prove something pretty remarkable. The ancient Egyptians actually succeeded. Their whole strategy of using lavish, physical burial rituals to preserve their heritage, it worked perfectly. We are still talking about them, studying them, and marveling at them thousands of years later.
Now, when we look at global heritage today, there is a really sharp contrast between how the ancient Egyptians preserved memory and how contemporary African cultures often do. The ancient Egyptian method was, as we've seen, incredibly tangible. Huge material emphasis, massive stone tombs, and countless buried artifacts. But contemporary African heritage, which is heavily influenced by modern religions and changing economies, leans much more toward the intangible. It's belief-based, relying on the immense power of memory passed down through oral traditions, with way less focus on burying material wealth. Both are beautifully valid ways to conquer time, but they definitely leave very different footprints for future generations to find.
To wrap up this explainer, we've just seen how an entire civilization literally moved mountains to ensure their families, their bodies, and their stories survived the test of time. Now, in our modern era, we might not be building massive stone pyramids or wrapping ourselves in linen, but we are definitely creating massive digital footprints and shaping the memories of those around us. So, if the ancient Egyptians used monuments and magical texts to be remembered, how are you preserving your own legacy for the future? Definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.